Hello, my name is LoG, and welcome to my new series called LoG Learns, where I learn something, show you how to play it, and also show you why it works in the first place. For this first edition, we will go over the iconic solo for the Gino Vannelli tune Brother to Brother. Let's first listen to what this solo sounds like with a broken down and clean arrangement. This solo will be split into parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to fully make sure that we understand not only how to play the solo, but why the solo works in the first place. A huge part of learning and playing a solo like this is understanding the harmony and the chord progression that's happening behind. In my opinion, if you are playing this type of solo or learning this type of solo and you cannot call off the chord progression or call off the chord that's happening at any given moment, you are simply doing it wrong, and you'll never truly understand why the solo sounds the way it does. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to part 1. There are two types of chords that you'll find in this solo that are pretty typical for this genre. The first type of chord is what I call a target chord. This is a chord that we're constantly shooting for and kind of makes up the bulk of the harmonic foundation of the part. These chords are usually major and minor or variations of that, so major 7, minor 7, etc. They could of course be other things, but in this solo they'll mostly be major and minor. The other type of chord that you'll hear is what I call a setup chord. This is a chord that sets up the target chord that you're about to hear. It makes you want to hear that target chord more. It prepares your ears for that chord, so when you get there, it's even more satisfying. Setup chords are often dominant 7th chords. They can of course be a variety of things, but in this song, you'll mostly hear them as dominant 7th or maybe some other types. Another important thing about these setup chords is that they're often not in the key, or at least contain notes that are not in the key, making them extra colorful when you hear them. So let's first go over the main target chords that we'll be hearing in this song, which act as the foundation for the whole thing. There are really two, at least for this section, there are really two target chords that we come across, B minor and G. So here's our standard B minor, here's our standard G. You can think about it like we're in the key of D and we're playing the 6th chord, B minor, and we're playing the 4 chord, G. Now, of course, they're not just plain vanilla 1, 3, 5, B minor and G. They have other notes in the chord to kind of add some thickness and change the vibe. So for example, the B minor, instead of just being straight up 1, 3, 5, or 1 flat 3, 5, because we're playing minor, we'll add in a flat 7, which creates the minor 7 sound, pretty common, kind of a smoother minor. But the main note that's really important is the fact that the B minor has a 2 on the top of the chord. So what do I mean by the 2? If this is our root of the chord B, the 2 is simply up a whole step, so C sharp. I'm playing this note here, up an octave, on top of the chord, so it now sounds like this. So instead of our B minor, we now have this. The formula for this chord is 1, flat 3, flat 7, and then 2. So that would be B, D, A, C sharp. The fact that the 2 of the chord is on top is really important because that will determine what the lead will be. That is a very powerful note that if you want to really lock in with that chord, you have to take into account that that note is pretty much being featured in the chord. And you will hear exactly that once we get into this part of the solo. The G chord is the exact same thing. Instead of just a plain G, you might hear G major 7, which sounds like this. That's a G chord with the 7. So what do I mean by the 7? If this is our root G, the 7 is just simply always back 1 fret. We're adding that note into the chord on top. Another type of sound that you'll hear, which is very common for a 4 chord, is a chord or a major 7 chord with a sharp 4. That looks like this. Here's normal major 7. Just another version. That's 1, 7, 3, 5. And instead of playing 5 on top, I'm going to play the note right back 1 fret. That is the sharp 4. That sounds like this. Or like this, if I want to bar and grab the 7 again on top. So the formula for this chord is 1, 7, 3, sharp 4, and then 7 again. That'll be G, F sharp, B, C sharp, F sharp. Obviously, very different sound than your plain vanilla G chord, but believe it or not, all of these notes are naturally occurring over a 4 chord. They're pretty typical sounds to play when you play a 4 chord. 4 chords are kind of the only chords that exist in the key that you can play sharp 4 with, so they're really taking advantage of that when this chord happens. Now, the G is not always this type. Sometimes it'll be this sharp 4, major 7, sharp 4 sound. Other times it'll be just plain major 7, but you will not hear just a plain G, but do keep in mind that is the foundation of the chord. It makes it a little bit easier to comprehend as we're moving through the progression. So those are the 2 target chords. That's really it. That makes up the bulk of this section. So now let's talk about the other chords, the setup chords, these chords that are often not going to be in the key, but really help build into the 2 chords of the 2 target chords, I should say, the B minor and the G. The most common type of setup chord that you'll hear in music is what I call a 5 of. It's simply a chord that is built on the 5 of the chord that you're moving to, and the chord type that you'll usually play is a dominant 7th. So for example, if I play B minor, and then I simply move to G, I am not using a setup chord at all. I'm just moving to the G chord. But if I want to set up that G chord, what am I going to do? I'm going to look at G, find its 5th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's the 5th, or upper power chord if you want to think about it like that, and you play dominant 7th off of that note, regardless of if that chord actually exists in the key. It often won't, and that's actually the cool part about this, bringing out some notes that are not in the key. So that would sound like this: B minor to D7, and then to the G, setting up that G chord because that chord pulls your ears towards the G. So again, here's the normal B minor, and then here's the G. Here's the B minor with the D7 before the G. B minor, 5 of G, G. Now you can, of course, just like the target chords, you can kind of build up or fancify this 5 of as well. Instead of just playing a standard like D7, we can add in some notes that are in the key to kind of fill out the sound. So a common one is playing dominant 7th and adding in its 2. That would be E. We're in the key of D right here, so E is definitely in the key. We're good to go. We can also add in maybe B. That's also in the key if we wanted to. So if you ever want to fill out that dominant 7th chord, just simply look for other notes in the key, start playing them, and you'll get some cool sounds. The one that's mostly happening in this song, or in this solo at least, when we set up the G chord, is a D7 with the 2 on top, and that looks like this. D, F sharp, C, E. That would be 1, 3, flat 7, and then 2 on top. The standard name for this is D9, if that makes more sense to you. So that's going to be B minor, our full thick B minor, then the D9, and then we head over to the G. Again, that D9 is setting up the G, preparing our ears for that chord. Well, we can do the same exact thing when we move back to the B minor by playing its 5 of. We play B, we look at B, go to its 5th, which is F sharp, so I'll play it down here, and we play dominant 7th built off of that note, which sounds like this. So now we have a chord that not only sets up the G, we now have a chord that sets up the B minor, F sharp dominant, into the B minor. And again, if we want to fill out the sounds of that chord, we can simply look for notes that are in the key, add them to that chord. So if this is F sharp dominant, we can maybe add in a D, right? Here's D, that's definitely in the key. It's also the 3rd of the chord that we're about to go to. We can add that to the chord to get some different effects. Here's the standard F sharp dominant. Here it is with that note, right? We can even add in the G on top. That's another note in the key. We can even add in the A on top. That's another note in the key. Right? We get a bunch of different sounds by simply looking for notes that are in the key or maybe in the next chord, and we can simply add them into our sound. Now, these sounds are very different, right? This is like a dominant 7th with a sharp 5, or dominant 7th with like a sharp 2 or a flat 2, or sharp 9, flat 9, as it's usually called. These are different sounds, and this sound is almost always exclusive. I don't want to say exclusively, but often used when you are moving to a minor target chord. So if you're moving to a major target chord, your notes are often going to be pretty standard, normal 2s, normal 6s, etc. But when you're moving to a minor target chord, that's where you get stuff like sharp 5, flat 9, etc. You don't have to do that. You can, again, do whatever you want. You can play any kind of dominant chord to any kind of target chord, and it's going to work as long as the rest of the band is following you. Should be fine. So generally that is what people will play. So let's play all of that, and you can hear how all of these sounds flow into each other. So here's the B minor, 5 of G, G, 5 of B minor, B minor. Right? So let me play those actually the vanilla, just triad versions, 1, 3, 5 versions. B minor, D7, G, F sharp dominant, back to B minor. Right? So you can still hear that flow is still there. That setup nature of D7 to G and F sharp 7 to B is still there, but it sounds a little bit fuller once we start filling out all of the chords with those extra notes, which is very typical of this genre. So again, what are we doing? These setup chords are simply looking at the target chord, so B minor, let's say, go to its 5th, F sharp, and play dominant. And because it's minor, we can add in some of these extra notes like sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9, etc. Most people will call this altered dominant. I don't remember if I said that already, but I just said it now. So altered dominant is usually the type of sound that people will play when moving to minor, but you'll definitely hear it moving to major as well, and you'll hear that in the solo for sure. So that's the sound that we're dealing with. Now there's one more type of setup chord that people will play that creates what I call like a setup progression. So instead of using just one chord to set up a target chord, people will use multiple chords, in this case, 2 chords to set up the target chord. So instead of going B minor, D7, the 5 of G, and then G, sometimes in this solo, you'll hear A minor, D7, and then the G. So what is that? A minor is G's 2 chord. 2 chords when you're moving to a major chord like G major are often minor. So instead of playing a 5 of G, we're playing a 2-5 of G. Very, very common sound that you'll hear all the time in a variety of styles, including like modern pop, etc. It's extremely common. So 2 chords when you are moving to a major chord are often minor. Just you can play minor or minor 7, minor 9, minor 11, whatever you want to do. All of those chords will generally work. Again, it won't always be that. Sometimes it'll be different types, which you'll see in this solo, but often that is what it will be. And then, of course, the 5 of is just the standard dominant moving to our major target chord. Now we can do the same thing moving to B minor. We can play its 2, 5, and 1. But because it's a minor chord, oftentimes when you play a 2 of a minor chord, it's not minor like we did earlier when we were moving to G. The 2 chord of a minor chord is often minor 7, flat 5. So if here's B, our target chord that we're shooting for, 2 is C sharp right there, and we play minor 7, flat 5, which looks like this. Again, really simple chord, minor 7, so 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. We take the 5, flat it, hence minor 7, flat 5 sounds like this. Right? 1, flat 5, flat 7, flat 3. There it is. And then we play the normal 5 that we've been doing this whole time, the F sharp dominant with some added fun notes like that. Now, that being said, again, generally a 2 chord, when you're playing a 2-5 of a minor chord like this, oftentimes the 2 is minor 7, flat 5. But it doesn't have to be like that, which you will see in this solo, especially in this part. It happens pretty much every time where they do not play this chord type. They play a different chord type, which we'll see here in a second. So that is going to be our template of sounds for this entire part, and to be honest, for this entire solo. The solo really dives into this sound, target chords with their setup chords, the 2s and the 5s, etc. It just does it with a variety of different kind of variations, voicings, key changes, and whatnot, but that's really the bulk of this entire solo. So with that in mind, let's actually go over the exact progression that's happening for this first part. So for the first part of this solo, it's 2 repetitions of the progression, but both repetitions are slightly different. The second one is actually very normal, which we'll talk about in a second, but the first one is a little bit of variation going on with how the chords move and a specific chord in particular. So it's going to start with our B minor with the 2 on top, B minor 9, as usual. Then we move to the 5 of G, the D7, with the 2 on top. Now you might think, oh, the next chord's going to be G as it normally would, but it doesn't. It plays D7 and then it goes right to the 2, 5 of B minor. So it skips the G. It feels like it's about to play the G, but it doesn't. It goes right to the 2, 5 of B minor. But there's something else that's a little different going on also. The 2, 5 of B minor, here's B minor. The 2 is usually C sharp minor 7 flat 5 like we just talked about, the 2 chord of a minor chord, and then our 5 like normal. But when we play the 2 chord, we are not playing this chord type. We are playing this. So this is a slightly different shape. Has the same vibe, but again, we're missing that main flat 5 of a minor 7 flat 5 when we play this type. What is this chord? This chord is minor 7 flat 5 like it usually is, but what is this one? This is a root flat 7, 2, and 4. So it's most commonly heard, I mean, there are a ton of names for this chord, but some people call this like an 11 chord, so C sharp 11. Some people call it suspended 11. Some people call it, you'll often hear like B/C sharp, because that's kind of what it is. It's like a B major chord with C sharp in the bass. Ton of different names for this. I personally call it a super sus or super suspended, because suspended chords usually have like a 4 in it. That would be suspended 4 like this, or suspended 2, that would be like this. But this one has both of them. So we've got the 1 flat 7, the 2, and the 4. So I call it super sus. You don't have to call it that, but I feel cool when I say that, so I'm going to keep calling it that. So C sharp super sus is what this is. Again, 1 flat 7, 2, and then 4. So that would be C sharp, B, D sharp. A note that, by the way, is not in the key, and then F sharp on top. Very cool sound. So again, is that the normal sound that you would usually hear when you're playing a 2 of a minor chord? No, but it doesn't matter. As long as you and the rest of the band are on the same page, you can pretty much play whatever chord you want as long as it's satisfying and is sounding the way you want it to. So that first repetition sounds like this: B minor, then the D7, the 5 of G, but we don't play G after this. We go right to the 2 of B minor, C sharp super sus, and then the 5 of B minor as we've normally been playing it, like F sharp dominant with a sharp 5, borrowing that note from the B minor chord, and then resolving, just like that. That's the first repetition. The second repetition is way more normal. It's simply B minor, and then 2, 5 of G, and then 2, 5 of B minor, exactly how it normally would be. So B minor, 2, 5 of G is A minor, D7, and I'm keeping that E on top, the 2, then G major, and this is the G major with the sharp 4, so 1, 7, 3, sharp 4, and then I'm just playing 7 again on top, like that. You can play it like this, however you want to do it. And then the 2, 5 of B, but it keeps the super sus on the 2. So here's our 2 chord, here's B, there's the 2, super sus, like that, and then F sharp dominant with the added tones, the altered tones, whatever you want to do, and then B minor. So let me play that one for you. B minor, 2, 5 of G, G, 2, 5 B minor, etc. So again, the first part, the chords were pretty much lasting a full bar, but because we got more chords happening for the second part, the chords are lasting only 2 beats. Like when we play that 2, 5, that's 2 beats here, 2 beats there, and then 4 beats, and then 2 beats here, 2 beats there, 4 beats. So that's kind of the typical progression, and the rest of the solo, or at least the next section, kind of settles into that. But remember, that first part of the solo does have that little bit of a variation where it skips the target chord, G, and goes right to the 2, 5 of B. Why are they doing that? Because they feel like it. It sounds sweet. That's your answer, right? You don't have to follow rules of any kind as long as what you're doing sounds the way you want it to. These chord shapes and the voicings are really important when it comes to the solo, because as we're about to get into what the actual solo is, you'll notice that the notes that are being played or chosen by the player match the chord perfectly, and that's why they sound so good. So it's always important to not just know the progression, but know the voicing of the chord. For instance, like B minor having the 2 on top, or this C sharp super sus having the F sharp on top. Those are the things that will help you determine what notes to choose when you're soloing. So speaking of the solo, let's finally get into what this first part actually is. All right, so the first tiny little passage of this solo sounds like this. All of that is over the B minor. And remember what I mentioned earlier about how important it is to know the voicing of the actual chord you're playing over, because that will determine the notes that you're playing. That is exactly what's happening right here. So if this is B, the root of the chord that we're playing, and we're kind of implying B minor in our lead, what are the notes that we're playing? Right, the main note that you're actually hearing right off the bat is this hammer on, the B up to the C sharp, and then the F sharp on the bottom, and then back to B. What are these notes? This is hammering on from 1 to 2 of B minor, then 5, and then 1 of B minor. Notice the note that we're sitting on, the note that you're really hearing right off the bat in this solo. What is that note? That is B minor's 2. Well, guess what the chord is? B minor with a 2 on top. That's why this note works so well, because you're just matching what the chord is already doing. The chord is featuring 2 on top right there, and so is the lead. If the chord was featuring like the 3 on top like this, and you also played the 2 up top as well, not that that's going to sound bad, but it might have a slight little clash because you're playing 2 and the chord is playing 3. That would sound like this. If I sang 2, bum, and I played 3, right? Slightly dissonant. But if you play 2 in the chord and you also sing 2, it sounds fine because you're matching the chord exactly. So I can't tell you if that's what the soloist was thinking when he made this, but that's why that note flows so well. That's that first little part, right? After that, we then grab this D up top, the flat 3 of B, and we immediately bend it up to the E. Now, during that bend, the chord has changed and is now this D7. Guess what note is on top of the D7? The E right there. That note naturally fits in this chord, and that's what we're also playing in the lead. Right? After this, just a real quick little kind of minor pentatonic feeling bend. Bend up to the E twice, bring it back, then play the B right there. Jump up to the E up top, bend full step up to F sharp. And what's the chord happening during that bend? Our C sharp super sus. What's the note on top of that chord? F sharp, right? So the lead again is matching the chord voicing exactly. Right? So that whole thing so far. First bend, bring it back. Jump up to the E, full step bend up to F sharp, right? Bring it back, so like this. So while the bend is up in the air, pick it, bring it back, play the D, bend up again, do pretty much the same thing, bring back to D, but then you play this note right there. What note is this? This is A sharp, not in the key, right? So you might be saying, oh, he's playing some fancy scale right there. No, he's not. All he's doing is playing that note because it's happening at that moment in the chord that's going on behind. The chord at this point is the 5 of B minor. That's F sharp dominant. Guess what note is in that chord? A sharp. It's the 3rd of this chord, right? That's why that note is being played in the lead. So again, kind of a weird fingering. You can kind of roll your finger if you want. I don't find that personally comfortable. I'll probably do that, hit it with my middle finger. So again, bend up to the F sharp, bring it back, hit this A sharp right there. Quick hammer on back to the E from the D, like that. And then we hit this C sharp right here. What chord is happening at that moment? B minor again, right? So we're again just targeting the 2, there's our B, the 2 of B minor because it's also being featured in the chord. Let me play everything up to there. There's our color note from the 5 of B minor. And now we're back to here. This finishes up the solo with this little section. So now this is all over B minor. That's like B minor's 2, 5, flat 7. So C sharp, F sharp, A. Also, by the way, there are about 1,000 ways to play this on the fretboard. So you don't have to do it like I'm doing. If you want to do it like that, or there's 1,000 ways to do it. So you can decide which one makes the most sense for you. I'm playing it like this. Up top, so that's really simple. C sharp, F sharp, A. Then we do this, right? So that's just a little F sharp right there. E, hammer on, pull off, or slide, whatever's comfortable. Then you dip down to the B right there, sit on the D. So, and do a little vibrato. All of that is pretty much over, again, the 2-5. So B minor, during this whole part, that's all over A minor, D, and then finishing up with the G. So there's nothing real specific going on there. It's kind of just playing B minor pentatonic, which is a sound that you can play over G, which we'll talk about in a later video. But again, that part. Again, play that with whatever fingering you want. After you're on this D, you simply go play a real quick E, then F sharp to G to A and back. Right? And the chord during that moment is going to be the G major 7 with the sharp 4, which makes sense because what note is this? F sharp is the 7 of G. There's our G. 7 is always back a fret, and that's the note that's happening in this chord, so we're just implying that note. Little figure like that. So let me play this whole thing one more time. And you can slide up to it again. Kind of that half step slide always sounds kind of nice into the F sharp. Afterwards, you go up an octave, do the same exact figure, F sharp, G, A, F sharp. And then what do you do right here? Dip down, grab that note, that A sharp again, hammer on from the D to the E, and then ending on this C sharp right there. So during this moment, that's during the 2-5 of B. So that's the C sharp super sus, and the F sharp dominant. So that's our sound. So the F sharp to G to A, that's happening during this chord, and then this little dip down right there, that's happening during, again, the F sharp dominant. Why? Because that note is the note that's happening in the chord right there, the third of the chord. That's why it works so well. And then to wrap up back to B minor, we're simply doing a little hammer on from D to E, back to what again? The 2, the C sharp over B minor. And in fact, it actually does the same sort of figure. If you remember the first part, hear that little thing? And then the second one, so he's doing the same sort of little melody, taking him from the F sharp to the B minor both times. So let me play this whole solo for you in one go. Here we go. And again, you can infuse the solo with your own sensibilities, bending, sliding, whatever you want to do. I'm trying to play it in the cleanest way possible so you can really see what's happening, and you can kind of do whatever you want with it afterwards. So this is a great example of why knowing the progression that you're playing, and not just the progression, but the voicings also, will really determine what you can play in your lead, because this solo is following the changes and the voicings perfectly, and that's why it sounds so great. So hopefully all this stuff makes sense. In the next video, we'll go over the lick that I'm sure all of you want to learn, that kind of fast lick for this next part. But yeah, it's going to be the same thing, following the changes, understanding what's happening, why certain notes are being chosen, etc. So hopefully all this stuff makes sense, and I'll see you guys in the next one.